All right, let's dive in. Today, we're looking at making things run smoother, specifically those configuration processes. Looks like you're trying to, streamline things a bit. And you've got some documentation about firing configuration rules more efficiently. Especially, there's this guide called Fire Configuration Rules Once Per Session. You're working with some pretty complex systems, huh? Now, this might get a little technical, but stick with me. We're going to find ways to save a ton of time. Like, some studies show this could cut your configuration time in half, just by making a few tweaks to how your system handles these rules. I'm really interested in this whole run once idea. Have you run into any, roadblocks when trying to make it work in your systems?
Well, the biggest problem is figuring out when to actually use it. Not every rule needs to run only once. The key is figuring out which rules are fetching data that doesn't change much. Like, think about checking your mail. You wouldn't go out every 5 minutes to see if anything's there.
Right.
You check once, and if there's mail, great. If not, you head back inside and wait for the next delivery.
I like that. It really shows how much time we waste checking things that hardly ever change. So how does it help us find those rules that don't need to run all the time?
It focuses on using these two special attributes called runOnceBegin and runOnceEnd. They basically act like the system's memory, telling it whether rule needs to run again or not. Think of runOnceBegin like a light switch, always flipped on. And when a rule runs the first time, it flips that runOnceEnd switch off. So the next time the system sees that rule, it notices runOnceEnd is off and knows it can skip it.
That's a really clear way to explain it. So we're basically stopping the system from doing unnecessary work. But flipping a light switch is easy. How do we actually get this to work? Like in a complicated system?
That's where the guide gets into the details. It gives you a step-by-step process to create those attributes. Then you integrate them into your configuration rules. And make sure the system remembers the runOnceEnd status, even across multiple sessions.
That sounds pretty complex. Can you kind of walk me through it without getting too technical?
Sure. So it all starts with setting up these runOnceBegin and runOnceEnd attributes. The guide's very specific about the type and what their starting values should be. It's not like building a house. You need those initial measurements, right?
Okay, so then what? How do these attributes actually get incorporated into the system?
Well, that's where this idea of a commerce attribute comes in. It's like a container where the runOnceEnd flag gets stored. Specifically, it's at the line item level. Think of each line item as a mini project within your whole configuration. We need a way to tell each of those mini projects if a rule has already run during this session.
So we're not just teaching the whole system to remember, but each little part. That's cool. But how do we make sure that runOnceEnd flag gets switched off at the right time?
The guide recommends using a script for that. It's a little bit of code that automatically copies the runOnceEnd value over to the commerce line item. It happens right after a rule has finished running. You don't really need to get into the code itself, just know it's taking care of things behind the scenes.
So the script's like the invisible worker making everything run smoothly. It's starting to sound like a well-oiled machine.
It is. But, like with any machine, the order of operations is really important. The guide really emphasizes making sure the attributes and rules are arranged in the right way. And this all happens within the configuration layout editor.
So there's a specific order we have to follow. What happens if we mess up the order?
If things aren't in the right place, the system might not work the way it's supposed to. Like if you tried to bake a cake but threw all the ingredients in at once, without following the recipe. Might look like a cake, but it won't taste very good.
Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster. Okay, so we've got the attributes, the storage, and the script. What's the last piece of the puzzle?
The final step is adding a specific condition to all those rules we want to optimize. This condition checks if the runOnceBegin value is the same as runOnceEnd. It's like giving those rules a special key. They can only run if both flags match up. And that only happens on the very first run. Like putting a lock on the door, only if the key fits. Then the rule can actually run.
Okay, I'm really starting to get how clever this whole system is, but it also sounds like it takes a lot of planning to set up. From your experience, are there any common mistakes people make when trying to do this run once thing?
One of the biggest is trying to use it for everything. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's super important to really analyze your configuration process. Figure out which rules are actually dealing with data that doesn't change, where running it over and over doesn't really do anything.
So it's about being picky, choosing the right tool for the job. We wouldn't use a hammer to screw in a light bulb, right?
Exactly. If you overuse this run once logic, it could actually slow your system down. Imagine like a rule that needs to check inventory levels in real time. before a customer can add something to their cart. If that rule only ran once at the beginning, you could end up selling stuff that's out of stock.
That's a good point. It shows how important it is to understand what each rule does and how it all fits together. But when you use this run once strategy the right way, it sounds like it could make a huge difference. Can you give me an example of how this might work in a real world scenario?
Sure. Let's say you're working with a system that creates personalized travel itineraries. Each traveler has their own preferences and budget and travel dates. When they put in their info, the system has to check all these different external sources, like flight databases, hotel reservation systems, even weather APIs.
Whoa, that sounds like a lot of processing power. Basically, every traveler is triggering a ton of data requests.
Right. Now imagine some parts of their itinerary stay the same, like they've picked their destination and their travel dates are fixed. In a regular system, every time they change something in their itinerary, even if it's just checking a different hotel, those initial data requests would happen again, even though the destination and dates haven't changed.
So all those repeated requests would just bog down the system, making everything slower.
Exactly. But with this run once logic, those initial data fetches, the ones for destination and dates, they'd only happen that one time. Any other changes to the itinerary would only trigger the rules that are actually affected by the change, like checking if a different hotel is available.
So it's like we're breaking down the configuration process, making sure each rule only runs when it absolutely needs to. But what if the traveler closes the system and comes back later to tweak things? Will the system remember what it's already done?
That's where that commerce attribute we talked about comes in. Remember, it's like a memory for each line item. It stores whether the runOnceEnd flag is on or off. When the traveler comes back to their itinerary, the system checks that memory, and it only runs the rules that haven't already been run.
It's like the system is learning, getting smarter with each use. Beyond travel itineraries, where else could we use this run once principle? Are there other areas where it could really make a difference?
Honestly, the possibilities are pretty much endless. Any system that has a lot of repetition, especially stuff that involves getting data from outside sources, it could probably benefit from this approach. Think about financial systems processing transactions, or scientific simulations running complex calculations, even marketing platforms analyzing customer data.
It's like a universal concept that can be applied across so many different industries. But as we've talked about, it's not a magic solution. It takes careful planning, really precise implementation, and a deep understanding of how things work.
Yeah, it's definitely not something you can just plug in and forget about.
Yeah.
It's more about shifting your mindset, changing how you think about efficiency and optimization. It's about asking yourself, do we really need to do this every single time?
Yeah, it's about finding that balance between letting the system do its thing and making sure it's not wasting time on stuff it doesn't need to do. This deep dive has really shown me the potential of this whole run once idea. It's not just about speed, it's about making systems actually smarter.
And it frees up the people working with those systems. They can focus on the things that really need a human touch instead of getting bogged down with all the repetitive tasks.
Exactly. So before we wrap up, I want to challenge our listeners to think about how they can apply this run once thinking to their own work.
Yeah, definitely. Look at the processes you deal with every day. Are there any steps that seem like they're happening too often, or data that's being pulled unnecessarily? Maybe they're calculations that could be saved for later. Even small tweaks using this run once idea can make a big difference in how efficient things run.
It's all about constantly looking for ways to improve, to streamline things and make them work better. Remember, it's not about finding the perfect solution right away. It's about trying things out, experimenting, and fine-tuning your approach.
And don't be afraid to shake things up a bit. Sometimes those processes we take for granted are the ones that need to change the most. By questioning how we do things and being open to new ideas, we can find ways to make systems faster, smarter, and more adaptable.
That's a great point to end on. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep searching for those solutions that make our systems and our lives a little bit better. Until next time, happy diving.